So this session will focus on the project proposals that we have in our EdSub TCP. We usually have these project proposals once per year. So we have 5 presentations in total, 5 project proposals. We start off with Frederick Friend from GAMS. So he will present on the 2 project proposals that he's got, Times Cloud Service and Times Miro app. So Fred, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks for the introduction. You can see my screen already, right?
Yes.
Okay, then thank you for the opportunity to present the 2 proposals to the EdSub Executive Committee today. The 2 projects that we are proposing are about a Times Cloud Service and about a Times Miro app. And the cloud service proposal is suggesting a joint project and was submitted in cooperation with Gary Goldstein and Amit Kanudia. And the second proposal is about a Times Miro app and builds on an initial prototype that has been presented at this year's July EdSub workshop. And this is also a joint proposal together with PSI, IER, and Decisionware. And in this presentation, I will outline the key aspects of both projects. Each of them would work individually, but in the end, I would also like to emphasize on certain synergies between them in case the EXCO decides to approve both of them. So let's start with the Times Cloud Service and our motivation to suggest such a service. We have been in touch with Times users over the last couple of months and years and have been asked whether there could be a solution that gives occasional Times users or potential future Times users a possibility to solve Times models without the need to purchase a GAMS solver license and without the limitations imposed by free services such as the NEOS optimization server, for example. And the purposes for these requests were manifold. So for example, this was about the dissemination of results where Times modelers would like to give third parties access to their model and data with an option to reproduce results, or maybe to also play around with data modifications and resolve the model. And such a third party could, for example, be a reviewer for peer-reviewed journals or for project applications or something like that. And another obvious purpose would be to attract potential new users where licensing costs can often be a hindrance, and the cloud service, which is centrally administered and paid by EdSub, could contribute to lowering the financial entry barrier. But what we've also heard from time to time was an occasional need of existing Times users to outsource heavy computations to powerful hardware in certain situations without needing to worry about licensing issues. And to address those needs, we suggest a Times Cloud service that allows to solve Times models in the cloud. And in such a service, the required software will really be installed and licensed on a dedicated server. It will be convenient to access, for example, via username and password, and it will build on state-of-the-art technology called GAMS Engine, which is designed for GAMS in the cloud applications. What are the components and who are the players in such a service? There are, of course, the users who want to solve a Times model, and there's really no limitation in the number of users who could use such a service. Then there is the entire cloud setup consisting of hardware, meaning a server, and software that runs on that server, like the operating system or GAMS Engine, which acts like a broker that assigns incoming job to available GAMS workers, and a GAMS worker can be thought of as a process that solves your GAMS model. And furthermore, there would need to be one or maybe multiple service admins. And how do these components and roles interact? Well, to get access to the cloud service, at least for the first time, users would need to request credentials from a service admin who decides whether they are entitled to use the service or not. And if they are, they get username and password. And for example, they can also get a certain quota in terms of maximum compute time that they can use. And furthermore, the service admins will also be able to help with other issues like hanging jobs or whatever unexpected behavior may occur. And another task of these service admins would be to maintain the software on the server, meaning that the operating system, GAMS and GAMS engine, will need to be kept up to date. Now, assuming that such a service is up and running, the user has gotten her credentials, the service can be accessed through different clients. Details about that follow soon. And it is important to note that the user can also specify the required resources for a job. So for example, if you have many small models, you would request maybe a single core and a small amount of RAM. But there are also super large times models where you might need many cores and a large amount of RAM, and that can all be specified for every single job. And what might also be worthwhile to mention here is that the entire technology is really fit for the future, meaning that a single server setup, as suggested in this proposal, can easily be upscaled if needed at some stage in the future. Now, assuming that the cloud service is ready to be used, jobs can be submitted through the various clients. And one of these clients is, for example, GAMS Studio. So that's the development environment GAMS users usually use when working locally with GAMS. And to solve a job, you usually click here on a run button and GAMS solves your job locally. But recently, Studio has been extended to integrate GAMS engine. And now users can also solve a job through GAMS engine, which in this case would mean through the Times Cloud service. And when clicking on Run Engine, a little pop-up window will appear, and the user has to enter her credentials, and then the job is executed on engine or through the Times Cloud service. And in such a setup, of course, GAMS would still need to be installed locally, but in order to use the service, a free demo license is really completely sufficient. But a cloud service could also be accessed from different clients through application programming interfaces or APIs. And one work package of this proposal is to establish such an interface between VEDA and the suggested cloud service using one of those APIs. And a third option to interface with the cloud service is through the so-called engine web user interface. And this is, for example, where an admin can manage users, add new users, remove existing users, and set quotas and all sorts of other things. And the web UI also supports model management, meaning that it will be possible to register, for example, different versions of the Times source code, and users could then simply start Times runs through the web UI by uploading their run and DD files. And what is also part of the web UI is a job overview that provides information on queued, running, and finished jobs. And the results are always automatically stored in a database and can be downloaded at any time. So to summarize the interfacing options to a cloud service, we have seen GAMS Studio, we have seen VEDA, we have seen the web UI, and as a little sneak peek to the other proposals, I would also like to mention that a cloud service based on GAMS engine will by design work very nicely with Miro apps, and we will learn in a minute what a Miro app is. So to wrap this first proposal up, I would like to briefly go through the work packages again. Work package 1 addresses hardware, software licensing, and maintenance, and all of these aspects result in annually recurring costs. Work package 2 addresses the implementation of an interface from VEDA. GAMS will work with CanOrs to implement such an interface in work package 2. And last but not least, in order to make the cloud service really a useful asset for ETSAP, it has to be thoroughly documented. Examples will have to be provided, for example, as webinars or video tutorials. And we believe that a 2-year project duration is a good time span to establish such a service. And after that time, ETSAP can, of course, decide whether to continue or maybe even extend, or also to retire such a service. And regarding the project schedule, it should be mentioned that the service will be available through Studio and the web UI at a very early stage of the first quarter of the first project year, maybe a bit later, but still at an early project stage. The Veda interface will be implemented and documentation should be provided shortly afterwards. And with that, I would like to make a cut and come to the second project before I summarize them both together in the end. And the second project is about an open source Times Miro app. As most of you know, Times source code has been published under an open source license in 2019. GAMS also published its deployment framework called Miro earlier this year, also under an open source license. So that's a good basis to bring the two things together. And our idea to build a Times Miro app was furthermore amplified by our understanding that there is a general trend to more openness in energy systems modeling, and Times does not yet have an open source graphical user interface. And furthermore, we understand that there is a need for certain low-cost options. I mentioned that for solvers, but that also applies for the interface to attract certain user groups. And there are also the aforementioned cases where one might want to disseminate a Times model. And of course, that becomes much more convenient if the third party can access the model through a nice graphical user interface free of charge. And as a result of this considerations, we already built a Times Miro app prototype that has been published on GitHub and was presented at the July AdSep meeting. And now this project will really focus on bringing that prototype to the next level. Before we go into the details about the particular app, let's have a brief view on what Miro actually is. So Miro stands for Model Interface for Rapid Orchestration and allows to easily turn GAMS models like Times into modern interactive applications that run in every common web browser. And that way, simple apps showing data just in simple tables can be really obtained in minutes. But there are various visual components available to customize the apps in order to make them more user-friendly and visually appealing. And if predefined visualizations are not sufficient, there's always the option to embed custom renderers. What else? It comes with a built-in database. It comes with a so-called hypercube mode to configure scenario batch runs and much, much more. And of course, since it's a deployment framework, passing Miro apps to others is really easy. So that happens through a single self-contained file. And yes, the already mentioned prototype, which is available on GitHub, already supports some basic run configuration of Times models through several widgets. It also comes with a data import facility that allows to import entire Times datasets from the so-called DD files, which can be used to populate the data tables behind the various other input tabs. And with that said, it should be noted that the input data that the user is working with and that she can, of course, also then edit in the Times Miro app is based on the GAMS symbol names that can be found in those DD files. There's also a data import export facility from and to Excel, but for now, the formatting of these Excel files is very close to the data representation inside the Miro app. And what we see here is, for example, an Excel file exported from the Times Miro app. In Excel, that is a flat file, but within the app, the data can be browsed and edited through powerful data cubes with pivot table features like filtering and aggregation. And that data cube can really be sliced and diced by regions, processes, commodities, etc. And what we also see here is that it comes with built-in charting facilities. So in this case, we are looking at the output attribute varcom net, which describes the net level of certain commodities across different years visualized as a stacked bar chart. But as mentioned before, this project is about bringing this prototype really to the next level, meaning that new features will be implemented and existing functionality will be enhanced. Certain items have been already identified and made it onto the development agenda, such that REST network visualization, user-defined sets, enabling of the so-called hypercube mode, and a few other things. And that way, we hope that the app will be a useful and really user-friendly asset to the AdSub community at the end of the project. And to really assure the maximum benefit, the app development will happen in close cooperation with experienced Times users and AdSub members, who will make suggestions for desired functionality, but also provide their models, like, for example, the starter model or the Swiss Times model for testing. So by using a broad set of times models during the development phase, we will assure to come up with a user-friendly app that can hopefully serve as a times model front end for more times users in the future. And of course, as mentioned before, everything we do during the development will be made available on GitHub. To wrap up this proposal, let's again have a brief look at the suggested work packages and associated costs. Compared to the first project, this one is much smaller and basically structured into the actual development and documentation, and the suggested duration is 1 year. Now, in the final summary, I would like to focus on synergies between the two projects. What we see here is that both projects would make sense individually. So the app does not require the cloud service, and the cloud service does not require the app. But both would work very well together, and the synergy I mentioned before that really comes for free if we conduct both projects would be a so-called Miro server solution, where the Times Miro app is also installed in the cloud and is accessible through the web and submits its job to the Times cloud service. And in such a setup, there is no need to install any software locally anymore. And with that said, I should also mention that even if not part of this proposal, a similar setup where everything runs in the cloud might also be possible with Veda Online, which, as far as I know, is available as prototype so far. So maybe that's an interesting idea for some follow-up project if AdSub decides to go for the cloud service. So to summarize the key benefits of both proposals from our perspective, we are convinced that these projects will enhance the diversity, the transparency, and the affordability of the Times toolbox, and thereby they hopefully will contribute to the attraction of new user groups. They will facilitate new ways to disseminate Times models, and they will increase the openness of the overall Times modeling framework. And with that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you for your attention. And of course, questions are welcome.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for respecting the time limits. So any questions, please, in the chat? Or if you would like to raise your hands as well. Okay, so
I don't see any questions so far.
So
right?
there is something in the chat. So Maurizio is asking, we should upload on Miro the demo models that we're using for the AdSub training courses.
Yeah, that sounds of course like a good idea. I mean, we also have Gary aboard who will provide us with the starter model. But if we have more examples from different training courses that we can consider for further development and maybe also make them available publicly on the GitHub page, that would of course be a good idea that might add additional value, I guess.
Yes, because we have specific demo models, which are small models that we use for the training session. So that would be an ideal starting point for new users.
Right.
Okay. A question from Paul, who would have access to the cloud computing service and at what cost? So I'll try just to answer that and then you can go on, Fred. The idea here is that ETSUP will finance the project, and this, with an annual cost, will basically give ETSUP the possibility to offer licenses to whoever ETSUP wants. This is how roughly I understand that. So it's up to the ETSUP executive committee to decide where we offer these options.
That's also my understanding. I don't have much to add here. There's really no predefined limitation in the numbers of users or something like that. We would need to agree on certain rules how it is decided who gets access to that service, and that's up to the executive committee, I guess.
James, so let me go to a question by Kari. Will the users from Iran have access? Because we keep on having this issue with Iran and GAMS. So
yeah, I mean, that's probably a tricky legal question, and I'm afraid that the answer is no, because I mean, that's not a decision made by GAMS, but by the US government. So Iran is one of the sanctioned countries, besides, for example, North Korea or Cuba, and I think there are a few more, to which we are not allowed to sell licenses. And of course, providing such a service is not intended to be used to circumvent the legal authorities who prevent us from doing that. So sorry for that.
And one last question from James: what would the scale limits be in the GAMS times cloud hardware? And could the user request particular chipsets as well as RAM and number of cores?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the service as suggested now would be installed on a particular server. So I think we made a suggestion for a server we have good experience with that comes, I think, with 12 with an AMD CPU with 12 cores and 128 gigabytes or something like that. And you will not be able to request more than that for a particular job. Of course, with the current cloud computing landscape, there is much more powerful hardware available, but that, of course, would add additional costs to scale up the service. There's also the question whether particular chipsets as well as RAM can be requested. So I mean, the chipset you cannot request, but you can, for every job, request a certain amount of RAM and the number of cores, but that will be limited to what we have available on the server where we set up the service. I mentioned that this technology is fit for the future. So of course we could migrate this to a bigger server, and it is also prepared to what we call elastic cloud computing or burst computing, where you can fire up additional hardware instances on demand. But that makes the licensing tricky, which is why we did not suggest it so far. But if that becomes of interest, we should probably discuss in detail whether that could be an option for the future.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Fred. I think we don't have any more questions here. So we can move on to the next presentation. Thank you for your time. Yeah.